we're going to get back on the Charger stuff, front suspension. So get the lower control arms. We've got all the sway bar stuff here. This is all steering stuff. These are lower control arm shafts, lower control arm bushings. These are for the upper control arms. These are for the upper control arms. And there's the upper control arms right there. We got the instructions. I got a little bit of silver anti-seize, and I got a dead blow hammer for putting the bushings in and stuff. So I think what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to try to get the control arms assembled so they're all put together, and then we'll go from there. And we'll start with these upper control arms, and they're labeled right and left, and then also if you look, they are different. They've got a little bit of a, they put the twist in the ball joint there for caster. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to put the heim joints in the ends of those. So I got a little bit of anti-seize on the threads here, and I'm also got this nut bottomed out on this one, and I'm going to take a measurement, and they are about 1 3/4 inches. So that being said, I'm going to thread these things in to the control arm at about 7/8. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I'd like to start out with halfway in and out on that. So I'm going to thread them in until they're 7/8 out from this mark right here, from the end of the tube to the top of the nut, and then we'll thread the nut down and we'll start, and that way we'll be half in and half out, and that's a pretty safe place to start as far as getting setups going later on. And right now we're not gonna worry about cranking nothing down or anything like that, because obviously we're just setting things up and getting things bolted together mock-up style. So I'm not worried about cranking anything down. We're not gonna pump any grease in the ball joints or anything like that just yet. We're just gonna get things kind of started here so we can bolt stuff together. But putting the anti-seize on there right out of the gate's a pretty good idea, because I don't want to gall nothing up. This is definitely something I would want to lubricate right out of the gate. So it does seem like, which I'm happy about, it does seem like that they've run a tap down these since they powder coated them, because I don't have a tap that size, and they seem to be threading together pretty good. So I think this is a pretty good kit. And there we go. We've got both upper control arms put together. So I'm going to set them off to the side here. Notice I put some cardboard down on the big table here, because once again, I don't want to tear up none of this powder coated stuff. I want to try to make sure that we're not beating this stuff up while we're putting this stuff together. So we get the lower control arms. I've got these bushings, these polyurethane bushings that it come with, and then it's got these cups that slide onto here, onto these cross shafts, and these cups actually capture those bushings inside the control arm when you slide it through over there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of this wheel bearing grease here. I'm going to grease up these here, because they've got grease zerks on them anyway. I'm going to grease these up, and I'm going to try to put these bushings in these control arms, and then we'll clean our hands up and we'll go for the next step. I don't think it's going to be it's not going to be difficult at all. Sometimes some of these kits, you get these and they got bushings, and then you got to like beat these bushings in, but this everything's going together real nice on this kit. So, and later on when we're all finished putting the car together for final, we'll obviously pump some grease in these things, but for right now that's not going to be necessary. We're just going to put these together and bolt them on the car. I'm just taking my finger and putting a little grease on there and snapping these things in. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get these off of the bench here, and I'm going to go ahead and mount them on the car so I have room to assemble the shocks, because we got to put the springs and stuff on the coilovers. All right, so the first thing I want to do is I want to get this tape off of here, and there's a threaded hole here, and there's a set screw that goes in here when that cross shaft goes in, but that cross shaft and those bushings all have to kind of come up here at the same time. So I'm going to get that set screw started in there, and then I'm going to bring all of the bushings and components over here and get them up here. Alright, I got everything over here ready to put this on the passenger side. So they say in the instructions that the sway bar mount will go towards the front of the car. And here's what we're dealing with. So we got this shaft, and this shaft has that dimple on it for that set screw like I was talking about that goes in that hole right there. So we got the set screw here, we've got the two inner cups, and then we've got the two outer cups, and then we got the two bolts. Now I'm going to lubricate this shaft before I put it in here. And then also, if we were going together for final with this thing, I'd be putting red Loctite on the set screw and on these two bolts. But for right now, since we're just going together for mock-up, I don't think I'm going to put any kind of fat thread locking compound or anything on there. I just need this stuff kind of together. So also, I need to go find the right size Allen wrench for this before we get in the middle of this. So let me go find that, and we'll be back and put this together. All right, and something I decided to do was that it's going to be hard for me to tell where this dimple is when I get this thing slid in there. So I took a red Sharpie and I kind of marked it along the line so I can look from the side, and I can kind of rotate this thing while it's in there and kind of get it lined up so I can put that set screw in. Well, so let me tell you what I did wrong. I started putting that together, and I did not have this collar on this side. And there's no way to get that in after you have this on here. So I had to actually take that back apart so I could put that collar back on. And now I can slide it up there and start to put it back together again. And there's a very tight tolerance on this, which is a good thing. All right. Now back to where we were. And of course, there's no way to see where I marked that now, so that wasn't as great an idea as I thought it was. But what I can do is I can spin this around, and I can thread this in here, and I can catch that, and then when I rotate it around, it'll be all right. Here we go. Now we can put these end caps on, and we can thread them bolts in, and we can go do the other side. And let me just say on these machine parts that you always want to use a dead blow, don't use any kind of regular hammer. You know, this thing isn't going to tear anything up. It's plastic. You know, if you'd have used a regular hammer on that, you'd have had that mushroomed over to where you couldn't have turned these bolts in or nothing like that. So use a dead blow on machine stuff. Don't abuse your parts. That's why I had the foam on the floor too, is because I didn't want to beat this thing on the concrete and be tearing this lower control arm up. You know, you got to protect this stuff, especially as expensive as some of this stuff is, and then you paid for the powder coat option. You really want to be careful with it, because you know, we can do all this work on the car and not tear none of this stuff up, and then when we take the car apart to paint it and stuff, we can wrap this stuff up nice and put it in the tote, and then when we get ready to put the car back together for final, this is one less thing we got to send out and mess with. So I think it's working pretty good. So all right, time to go to the other side. All right, we're back at the bench, and we got the lower control arms on. The other side went on way easier than the first side because I'd done one already. So we got these real nice double adjustable shocks that came with this kit. They're Vikings. And they've got plus and minus for compression and rebound. So these ought to be a real nice shock for doing just about everything this guy wants to do with this car, which is mostly going to be drag race type stuff, but he wants to be able to drive it too. So these are pretty nice shocks. What I think I'm going to do is, there's not much in the instructions explaining how these shocks go together. So I need to read the Viking instructions on how to put one of these shocks together. It does talk about putting the springs on and stuff. So I'm going to get all the parts for these shocks laid out and see what we got to do, and then we'll look about getting these together. Okay, so I got all the parts laid out, and so we've got an adjusting ring, then we've got the ring that holds the spring, and we've got this bearing, and this bearing is a hardened deal that sits on top of here, and it keeps the spring from chewing up this adjusting nut. And then we've got this top spring. And we've also got these spherical shock mounts that go in with these snap rings, so you need a set of snap ring pliers. So I'm going to go ahead and put this together. Now I will say this, they want you to put anti-seize on this threaded shock body, and that's great, and normally I would do that, except for the fact that we're not going to be adjusting ride height on this thing right now with any kind of weight on the car, and so there's no really chance of this thing galling, and I don't want to put any grease on this right now for mock-up, because we're going to be doing dusty gritty things around the car while the car's sitting at ride height with these on, and I don't want it to collect gunk and then we go try to take the nuts off and it scratches and damages the anodized finish. So for right now, I'm just going to put these things together dry, and we're not going to do any adjusting on them with any kind of weight on them. So that's where we're at with that. So the first thing on is this adjusting ring, and if you look, there's a little bevel on this. I don't know if you can see that or not, but there's a little bevel on this. There's a little raised up section. You want that little raised up section pointing up so it rides on this, so that there's less friction between the flat bottom of this, and you know, if you did this flat and flat, it'd be hard to turn. So you want to put that up there. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set this thing right at the bottom at what would be considered almost the lowest ride height. So the next thing that's going to go on is the spring ring. And I'm going to set that up just like that. And now you see there's a little gap in there. That is why you put that one up. And then obviously when we go together for final, we will put some kind of lubricant in there before we set this up for final. So now we're going to put the seat on here, this little steel washer. And that is just to keep that spring from when you go to try to adjust the ride height, that kind of acts like a bearing, and you'd also want to lubricate that at the final. So I'm going to open up one of these springs. These springs got a nice powder coated finish, and they're also labeled so you can tell what weight they are on the car. So we're going to put this on here like this, very, very carefully, and we're going to go ahead and extend the shock. And now we're going to put that like that, and that goes just like that. So now we are ready to put these spherical bearings in. And what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to put one snap ring in first, slide the bearing in, if that's possible, and then put the other one in. Okay, well that thing slides in pretty good without the snap ring in there in the beginning. So I guess what I'm going to do is slide it in there, and then I'm going to put the snap ring in afterwards. All of these things are different. I just put a set of QA ones together at work here a while back, and they did not go together like this. So you know, you just kind of got to do whatever the whatever the shop calls for. Most of this stuff is similar, so it's not like you got to reinvent the wheel every time, but it's just whatever manufacturer has going on. I don't know if the main thing you want to be aware of is that you actually get this snap ring down in the groove, and you make sure you get it seated, because otherwise this thing would be kind of a mess going down the road. So I want to make sure that I for sure have that thing seated down in that snap ring groove. And there we go, that one's done. So I'm going to put the next one together. Top. And the reason they don't put these together at the factory for you is because it would make it difficult to put the spring parts on the hat and the spring parts and stuff on if those were in the way. So it just makes the profile of the head of the shock a little smaller, so you can slip all of the different components on. Now with our shocks assembled, we're going to go ahead and put them on the car. I think we got some powder coat issues down here in the lower control arm for the bolts, so we're going to clean them up and then we're going to put the upper control arms on. Alright guys, like I said, we got the coilovers on there. We did have to go in and file out some of the powder coat on these lower control arms for these bolts to fit through, and we don't want to tighten these bolts up all the way because we don't want to ruin those nylocks. So when I get ready to set the car on the ground, I'll go get some non-nylock nuts just so we can tighten that up so everything can be secure. So now we're going to go in and we're going to put the upper control arms on and start to get the spindles on. Alright guys, so we got the coilovers on the car. So these are the factory replacement upper control arm mounting bolts with the cams on them. And then there's these misalignment bushings that go up against these heim joints, kind of like this in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to get all this stuff set up here, and then we're going to go put the upper control arms on the car and get ready to put the spindles on. Alright, so we got the rack out. It's a flaming rivet rack, and it's got nice adjusting sleeves with heim joints at the steering and polyurethane bushings. And this kit came with the fittings that go into the rack, and it came with a steering joint, and then they sent another steering joint. So I think you have all the steering that needed to hook this up to the factory column if that's what you were doing. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and get this rack bolted on and get it hooked up to the spindles. We already got the upper control arms in that we did earlier, put together earlier. We got those in, and we got the spindles on. So we're going to go ahead and get this rack in and get everything hooked up there, and then we're going to move on to putting brakes on. Alright, we got the rack and pinion bolted in there, and the spindles came with spacers welded on for the bump steer, so the bump steer's corrected, and we ended up centering the rack up, and we got that all bolted on there. So now we're going to move on to assembling the brakes. But yeah, the rack's all in there. So this stuff's all looking pretty cool. Okay, moving on to the brakes. We got all this cool brake stuff. We got these billet hubs, bearings, and seals, and then we got these Wilwood 4-piston front calipers, these 2-piece hat style 11-inch rotors with the top plates, and then we've got these cool black anodized billet brackets, and we've got all the nuts and bolts and hardware from Wilwood to put all this stuff together. So we're going to start building this stuff out so we can get it over there on those spindles. And I just want to say, you might follow these instructions because they're pretty good, and these are brakes. They need to work. So the first thing we're going to do is put these caliper mounting brackets on with these bolts that Wilwood provides with a little bit of red Loctite, and per the instructions we are going to torque them to 47 foot-pounds. And there we go. Caliper mounting brackets are on. And yeah, we did put red Loctite on them, and we're going to go ahead and torque all this stuff down because the spindles shouldn't need to come back apart. They're powder coated. The brakes and the spindles and everything get put together on them, and we can just take the spindles off with the brakes on them when we go to disassemble this thing for final and just take it loose at the ball joints. So there's no reason to not go ahead and just put all this stuff together the way it's supposed to be. So when we're assembling these rotors with these hats and these hubs and everything, we're just going to follow the directions, red Loctite, torque specs, all of that, and we're just going to go ahead and put the brakes together the way they're supposed to be for final. Alright, so we got those brackets on, so now I'm going to run these wheel studs into these. I checked the pattern on these. I'm going to run these down, and then we're going to torque these to 77 foot-pounds, and you're probably going to need a helper with this because I don't know how you would torque these down without tearing up the aluminum in a vise or something without a helper. So I'm going to try to hold these while I have a helper get these to 77 foot-pounds. And the instructions does not call for any kind of thread locking compound on these wheel studs. And I checked these wheel studs and the wheels that we're going to use, so that's what we're going to do next. Alright, so we got the wheel studs torqued in the back of the hubs, and I like to go around and mark them with a paint pen. I got to go when I mark them, know we got them tight, and then we pack the rear wheel bearings. Getting ready to put these grease seals in, and I got this Lyle seal installer kit. It comes with these different spacers like this, these aluminum ones, and this handle and this little bolt, and then also it's got a deal. You can put bearing races in with an air hammer with this thing. This kit's cheap. It's like 80 bucks. So instead of trying to beat these in with a 2x4 or something on these real nice aluminum parts, just go ahead and spend 80 bucks and get you one of these tools, and it works really, really good. Also, we went ahead and got the rotors with the adapters put together. Once again, we torqued them to 25 foot-pounds like the instructions and marked them with a paint pen so we know we got them together right. So we're going to go ahead and put these seals in the backs of these hubs, and then we're going to get these rotors bolted to these hubs so we can get them on the car. And we had to use the Wilwood spindle washers because they're smaller, so the center cap can still thread back on, the dust cap can still thread back on, so we had to use these Wilwood ones instead of their ones sent in the kit. Alright, so we put the calipers on, and we got all the spacers in that you're supposed to put in there. You're supposed to put spacers in until the rotor is centered up between the pads. So we got both calipers on and tightened up with Loctite. And that's going to be a wrap on the front suspension until we get a little bit further along. So anyways, thanks guys.